Book one is all about the books that are read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He is the author of the book Overcoming Life's Toughest Setbacks, no other than Mr. Andy Campbell.
Good afternoon, Daniel.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Andy. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Yeah, I am someone who has had a number of what one might call setbacks in their life, everything from childhood sexual abuse to the loss of parents, the eventual diagnosis with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and just while I was going through cancer treatment, the loss of my youngest son to suicide. That's a highlight of the lowlights.
Mr. Andy Campbell, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And what is the first physical, emotional, or environmental step someone should take to create a safety after trauma?
I think one of the things is to understand that you have some decisions that are yours. There is some control that you can have over your life, irrespective of what other people have done to you or the circumstances that have happened to you, whether that's health, whether that's emotional trauma, whether that's sexual trauma, whether that's the loss of a loved one. There are some decisions that you can make, and the first one is that your life is still valuable no matter what happens to you. Your life is valuable, and that there are some steps that you can take. There are some kind of beliefs you can adopt that can help you move from that traumatic experience through the difficult and kind of shocking time where you're reorienting yourself to persevere. There are some steps that you can take that will help you get back on the path to recovery.
How can someone recognize when they are emotionally flooded? And what's the simple grounding technique to use in that moment?
I think in that moment, the way you can know that it has happened is the emotional reaction that you feel to it, that visceral reaction that is almost uncontrollable. It happened. You have the thought, you remember the trauma, or it has just occurred, and you have this tremendous emotional response to it. What one can do to ground themselves is, one time I crashed a motorcycle. I was wearing a helmet. When I needed the helmet, I had to put it on before I had a crash. Right? You have to prepare yourself before, and understand that in life there will be difficulties. There will be crashes that will occur. And so, what I suggest is that you adopt and build into your mindset some beliefs that once you have a shocking event happen and you're not sure what to do next, you can fall back on those core beliefs kicking in and helping you without even thinking about them. So, one of them, for example, is always fall forward. That reminds me that when I've had a shock to the system, when I've had a traumatic thing happen, that in that moment, it reminds me I may not know what to do next, but I do know that I need to reorient myself back toward the meaning in my life. What is meaningful in my life will remain in spite of the difficulties that occur. So, one of the things that I work to train myself to do is when a very difficult situation occurs, is to the first thing is to reorient my mind back to the meaning I have in life. What is my purpose? And then that helps everything else kind of start to come back together again, whether that was the loss of my son, or whether that's being diagnosed with cancer, or whether that's going back and dealing with a number of difficult issues that happened to me earlier in life, such as sexual abuse. I think that's the first step.
Very well said, Mr. Andy. Empowering answer. Beautifully articulated. Why is self compassion often the hardest, yet most critical skill for trauma survivors?
I think because one cannot make progress in one's life if one does not believe that one's life is valuable, that they are important themselves. And so I think we have to get to a place of self acceptance so that we can then work on the recovery. We have to get to a place where we believe that overcoming this situation is valuable, not just to us, but to those around us.
Indeed. And how does trauma reshape our relationship with the body? And how can gentle movement rebuild trust?
Well, I think, look, these traumatic events, there's been a number of books written, all kinds of studies done. These traumatic events end up, we think, only in the mind, but they actually end up in every cell of the body. Our body remembers that visceral reaction, that emotional state of when that event occurred. That doesn't leave us. There are a number of techniques that I have come across over the years. I discuss a few of them on the website. And whether that is qigong, whether that is yoga, whether that is simply physical exercise with intentional breathing, whether that is doing more deeper or more intentional mental therapies such as EMDR, or whether that is using different techniques in books such as the energy codes and the emotion code. These techniques are there that through movement and using breathing techniques, we can reconnect with who we really are and then begin the process of healing from these events.
Mr. Andy, when motivation feels impossible, what's one non negotiable act of self care?
Well, I think one non negotiable act of self care is to engage in an act of self care, one must believe that one is valuable enough to take the action to care for oneself. So the first act, which comes a little earlier than the actual self care, is to believe that you are valuable and that you are worth having self care. The next step in self care, I believe, is to have the courage to face, and I believe this is a step in self care, to have the courage to face the impact of the events that have happened to you, to not uh, sweep them under the rug, to not pretend like they didn't exist, but to take responsibility for how you are going to respond the rest of your life from these events that have happened. So how will you do that? That to me is the first step in self-care, believing you are worth the self-care and then having the courage to look at your own decisions, not to excuse what others may have done to you or the situations that have occurred, but to take responsibility and have the courage to look at how you can change your life, how you can do self care, because then the self care next steps will become obvious to that individual. Maybe that is more meditation, maybe that is breathing exercises, maybe that is spending time in nature and sitting amongst God's creations, maybe that is going to a particular type of therapy. But the self care is to me kind of a few steps after one believes that they are valuable and worth self care, and then they have taken the step of having the courage to investigate what they can do to better their life and overcome this setback. And then they can take the step of identifying which self care technique would work best for them.
Beautifully articulated, Mr. Andy. Very well said. Again. And how does understanding the brain's trauma response reduce shame about reactions?
It is critical. If you spend time investigating, if you're curious about how the brain operates, I think one will realize, and again, there are many studies that are published, peer-reviewed studies, documented cases, so we can have some confidence that the brain's response happens in the moment, and you don't really have control over that. One of the things that they believe, a technique called EMDR, which is um, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, EMDR. This was a technique that was developed after the Vietnam conflict with returning vets who had PTSD. And what they think happens is that your brain, when you experience something, a traumatic event, you have some sort of emotion that is attached to that. It could be fear, it could be anxiety, it could be sadness, it could be any number of emotions. That becomes set in your neural pathway as how every time you remember that event, you will have that emotional reaction just the same way you did in the moment the event occurred. And so when you realize that the brain has basically learned in an instant how it will respond to a given situation, then to me that frees one up from the guilt of how we have responded since that event occurs, because then that awareness gives us the means to then approach the problem from how do I correct or how do I change the way my brain processes this information going forward. So I think that is kind of the step we have to take to reduce our own guilt in the way that we respond. If you have been sexually abused, you're going to have some not so great responses to stimuli that comes into you, or similar when you find yourself in a situation for which you feel unsafe or unsure, you're going to respond a way. You may not like the way you respond. You may get angry. You may become overly passive. You could have any number of not beneficial reactions. When you realize, I think that a person cannot react fast enough to stop that automatic reaction, then that removes, for me, some of the guilt in how I respond, as long as I take responsibility that that reaction that's happening is something I can overcome. I can do the hard work to overcome that reaction. So that the awareness and the action to overcome that response, to me, is how we relieve ourselves of that guilt.
Mr. Andy, how do you help people reframe to I'm broken to I'm adapting?
This can be difficult. I think first people have to want uh, the ult they have to want a goal for which changing that perspective is beneficial to their goal. I'll give you an example. I wanted to leave behind uh, the effects of the trauma that I had dealt with, these traumatic events that I had dealt with. I went to a therapist who did this technique, EMDR. She then explained to me. We spent a few sessions talking. She determined that my decision making was being negatively impacted by these events, and that there was a technique that could be used to help me make better decisions, to remove the emotional response and make better decisions that would free up my life to be better. I listened to her describe the process and I said, no, thank you. I don't want that. I don't want to live through that. I don't want to go through that pain again. She said, but do you want to be free from it? And I said, yes, I do. She said, look, it's going to take me about 20 to 24 sessions to work through these events with you. I said, look, that's 24 weeks. She said, well, it's really just 24 hours. And 24 hours is just one day. So are you willing to spend one day of reliving and working to free yourself from these events? Or do you want to spend every moment of every day for the rest of your life dealing with the memories from these events? And so when she reframed it, I could have not accepted that. But what she did was she told me, she got my agreement on what I wanted the goal to be. And then she reframed the process. So I think if we're reframing anything, the first step in that process is to agree on what you want the goal to be. If you want the goal to be life, if you want it to be abundance, if you want it to be peace, then you will be willing to listen to someone who reframes the problem or the challenge differently in the sense of how it will help you achieve your goal. So I think the step before reframing is to get to agreement on what you want the goal to be. And then I think we can reframe the problem in any number of ways that would match up to the goal that you have in life.
Mr. Andy, as a resilient survivor and inspirational author, what are your short term and long term goals?
Short term goal is to continue having these conversations, to speak to groups and share, details about my experiences and how I have worked to be resilient and to come back from these, or at least continue to survive in spite of these setbacks or traumatic experiences. Long term, I want to continue to live. I want to continue to be someone who encourages other people to continue to live. I want to be someone that is thought of as a person who finishes what I start. So I started life. I want to finish life, and that I persevere. So that's my long term goal: is to persevere and live as full of a life as I possibly can until the day I take my last natural breath.
Good luck to your goals, Mr. Andy, and looking forward for more success. And what would be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be an inspirational author?
I think don't downplay what you've been through or what you've learned, um, and think about how what you've learned may help someone else in a similar situation to that would encourage them or inspire them to have success. And don't I would say don't write from the position that you have all the answers. Write from the position that you have potential answers that you'd like people to consider adopting and then adapting to their own situations. I would say that we all have been through many things that we have learned from and that we have survived, and that anytime we can share those in a loving and responsible way with others who may be suffering, I think that would be kind of the first steps in sharing your inspirational story.
Thank you for your advice, Mr. Andy. And how does understanding the trauma within to let it go?
I would go back to part of what I said earlier. We have to have courage. It is an honorable thing. I believe there are kind of 6 steps to success: honor, courage, determination, perseverance, wisdom, and that finally success. I believe that having an honorable intention, an honorable action is the beginning, because when you run into a challenge, the honor of what you're doing will give you courage. And I think courage displayed over and over again, no matter how small of amounts of courage that is, we refer to that as determination. When we see someone who has displayed courage a few times, then we say that person is determined. When we see a person who has displayed determination a few times, we say that person has perseverance. They have persevered. My grandfather used to say that experience is what you get just after you needed it. And if that's true, then you have to persevere to gain experience. Experience is how we become a little more wise. We might not become wise, but we become wiser. And wisdom is the foundation of success. So I think it's vitally important that we begin our efforts to do an honorable thing. And an honorable thing is to survive. It is to improve your life. It is to overcome these traumatic experiences. And then we have to show courage.
Courage indeed, people. And Mr. Andy, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well. Geography 101 fourth season, and my baby podcast, Law 101 and Mental Health 101. Love Letters in fourth season, and Movie 101 review, as well as Music 101 is in fourth season too, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcasts. Mr. Andy, can you please complete this sentence? Healing is not about erasing the past, it's about blank.
It is about separating the emotion of the past from the present.
Empowering sentence indeed. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world through your book, Overcoming. And can you please invite our listeners to support your book as well as your advocacy or any projects that you're doing right now?
Yeah, you can find me at askandycampbell.com. And there you'll find links to the book, to speaking engagements, and other information related to my cancer journey and a few other things.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Andy Campbell because if you support him, more and more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Mr. Andy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel.
Monica, people, see you soon.